Let us remember the 3 victims of this savage attack: BB King, aged just 6, Elsie Dot Scancombe, aged 7, and Alice da Silva Aguiar, aged 9, and 8 more children and 2 adults who were seriously injured. I also want to thank Merseyside Emergency Services who responded to this event. As the Home Secretary quite rightly said, this report identifies very serious, repeated failings by public bodies. Sir Adrian said, and I quote, "A merry-go-round of referrals, assessments, case closures and handoffs meant no agency took the lead or properly addressed the danger Rudder Cubana posed. Multiple opportunities were missed to prevent this tragedy." Sir Adrian also found Rudder Cubana's parents created, quotes, "significant obstructions to constructive engagement." Sir Adrian makes important recommendations. I'm glad the Home Secretary will respond by the summer, and we on this side of the House will support necessary actions. During the inquiry, we heard evidence given by Rudder Cubana's former head teacher, Joanne Hodson. She told the inquiry she was pressured by mental health services to water down the EHCP to minimise the danger posed by Rudder Cubana because of his ethnicity. Ms Hodson told the inquiry this, and I quote verbatim, "My efforts to include this information in the EHCP were met with hostility by the father and also by mental health services. Miss Steed, who was from CAMS, even went as far as to accuse me of racially stereotyping AR as a black boy with a knife. Nothing could be further from the truth. But in the end, the wording of the EHCP was rewritten in many places." That's the end of her verbatim quote. Madam Deputy Speaker, this contributed to the clear risks being missed. The Nottingham inquiry into the 3 tragic murders there identified exactly the same issue. Mental health professionals in Nottingham decided not to section Valdo Calicone because they were concerned about, and again I quote verbatim, an over-representation of young black males in detention. And the government's own notes accompanying the King's speech on the mental health bill even refer to this issue as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, the fixation with ethnic disproportionality is deeply damaging. Ethnicity should never be a consideration when an agency is taking steps to protect the public. Everybody should simply be treated exactly the same. We cannot allow dangerous individuals to avoid detention for public safety simply because of their ethnicity. Everybody should be treated the same. I think it would be helpful if the Home Secretary makes clear from the dispatch box that she agrees with that approach and sets out how the government will change their approach in the future. Today's report also makes clear that Rudder Cubana's autism was wrongly allowed to inhibit the way he was dealt with. Yet the government's King's speech notes the mental health bill again expressly says people with autism should be sectioned less often. Given the findings of today's report, will the government reconsider that? I also want to raise the aftermath of this tragedy, which saw serious rioting. It is, of course, important to avoid prejudicing criminal trials. However, as Jonathan Hall, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, said, and I quote, "The government has to be aware that if there is an information gap, other voices, particularly on social media, will try to fill it." He went on, "Quite often, there's a fair amount that can be put into the public domain, and indeed, in October, 2 or 3 months after the attack, but well before the trial, information concerning the Al-Qaeda terror manual and ricin was put in the public domain without prejudicing the trial." So I think the failure to provide information did create an information vacuum in those early days of August 2024, and that vacuum was filled by untrue speculation online, some of it originating outside the UK, which fueled the riots. So having regard to that, will the Home Secretary commit to making sure such information is routinely released in cases of public interest in the future? Madam Deputy Speaker, as the mother of Elsie said at the inquiry, this tragedy must be a line in the sand. We owe it to the victims, to the survivors, and to their families to learn the lessons from this tragedy and to make sure it never happens again.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me say I welcome the Shadow Home Secretary's comments about potentially working together on the changes that need to be made as a result of the initial findings of the inquiry. The government will respond by the summer, and I look forward to discussions with him and with others in this House to make sure that the House is united as one in the action that needs to be taken. As he says, that is the very least that we owe the victims' families and all those who've been affected by this horrific tragedy. Let me just say on the issue of Mrs. Hodson, the head teacher, whose specific testimony he referred to, she of course gave evidence, and I believe that the position that she took was vindicated very strongly by the chair in the findings of the inquiry. Let me be absolutely clear. The only factors that should be taken into account are the potential risk posed by an individual and how best to manage that risk. No other factors are relevant, and it is clear, not just in relation to the experience that Mrs. Hodson had, but actually the failures that existed across a multiplicity of public agency. That was the failure to appropriately assess the risk that the perpetrator posed to others, which was at the heart of the problem, and that is how he managed to slip through the cracks, because no one agency took responsibility for the assessment of that risk and ultimately for the managing of the risk that the perpetrator posed to others. Those are the only factors that should ever be taken into account, and I will be working closely with government ministers from other departments as we formulate our full response to the findings by the inquiry and setting out what our expectations are of professionals, not just in health but in other public services as well. Let me also say on the diagnosis of autism, Sir Adrian in his report did make it clear that it would be wrong to make a general association between autism and increased risk of violence to others. But he also found that in the perpetrator's case, the way his autism manifested did increase the risk of harm that he posed to others. And it does show the absolute importance of taking a case-by-case approach and making sure that all factors are adequately taken into account and that agencies take responsibility for how that risk is going to be managed. And again, there are good lessons to learn from this for health practitioners and for others in our local services when it comes to both assessment of risk, but also ultimately for how it is best managed. Let me say to him on the issues relating to the communications post the attack taking place, especially at a point where there was a lot of misinformation that was being spread, particularly online. He will know that there has already been a change in practice, learning the lessons of what happened then. There was, of course, a well-meaning desire to make sure that nothing was done that might prejudice a future trial, but exactly how the rules are applied, I think, can be a matter of interpretation and degree. The College of Policing has already created new professional practice in its guidance for police officers. There is already now a new CPS, that is to say the Crown Prosecution Service and Media Protocol, and we are developing a new charter between criminal justice agencies and the media to make sure that whatever information can readily and easily be made available is done so at the earliest opportunity. It will always be incredibly important that nothing is done that might prejudice a future trial, but I know he will acknowledge that since this horrific attack, there's already been a change in approach to comms, and the government and other agencies have already, in other instances and in other cases, been making much more much more information available to the media and ultimately, therefore, to the public. Let me just say, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that the findings of the inquiry and also when Phase 2 reports will be of great interest to members across the whole House, and I do look forward to working not just with the official opposition but with all parties to make sure that the House is as one in the response to this horrific tragedy. That is what we owe all of the victims of this case.